This is May 20th, 2006 at 2 p.m. We are interviewing Stephen Walley in his Fuera Bush, New York home. Stephen served in the U.S. Navy from September 22nd, 1942 to April 4th, 1946. This interview is being conducted by June and Kenneth Hunter. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
My name is Stephen Walley, and I was born in Albany, New York on March the 29th, 1924.
What did you do before you entered the Navy?
I worked for RB Wing in Albany as a sales clerk and delivery person, and we more or less got supplies for the Navy in some respect. We had one man that used to make rope and tackle for ships, and he provided that, along with we provide different things for contractors to use in their construction processes. But I worked there from graduation of 1941 until September 22nd of 1942.
And then were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, it came about whereby this friend of mine who also worked at RB Wing asked me Monday, the day after Pearl Harbor, the 8th of December, he said, "Steve," he said, "why don't you join the Marines with me?" And I said, "Bill," I said, "in all respect to you and your feelings, I do believe I want to wait 6 months, and I want to join the Navy and learn a trade that I can use later in life, instead of being like an infantryman with no choice." So that's what I did. I waited until September, and then I joined the Navy and enlisted.
And then where did you go for basic training?
My basic training was at Newport, Rhode Island, and I spent between 5 and 6 weeks in basic training there out in their area where the boots, as they call them, were run through obstacle courses and so forth. After that, we had a 7-day leave, and I was able to go into radio school for shipboard radio, where I learned the principles of radio and electrical needs and so forth. And upon completion of that course, which was about 4 months, I came out as a radioman 3rd class petty officer. And at the last week of the course, we had people come in from Naval School in Memphis, Tennessee, asking for volunteers to become aviation radiomen. So about 6 or 8 of our class members wanted that particular type of career in the Navy, so we all went down to Memphis, Tennessee to continue, take a 10-week course to become aviation radiomen, where you substitute the keyboard for typing to a notepad and a pencil to take code by radio. And of course we learned the different parts of the signaling by blinker light or by signal flag and so forth. And we had 2 weeks of radar training, which were going to come in handy later on. And after completion of the radar school, we were sent to Naval Air Gunnery School in Jacksonville, Florida, which was another 8-week course in ground and simulated air gunnery activity, with moving targets and how to take the gun apart, how to put it back together, and how to maintain it. And upon completion of that course, those that wanted to had a choice somewhat of where they wanted to go for flight operation training in types of airplanes. Because of our height, 5'8", 5'9", we're better suited to be in torpedo bombers or dive bombers than a person 5'11" or 6 foot. They would be more suited for PBY Catalinas and so forth, which had more headroom. So we went to operation training to become familiar with the torpedo bomber at Jacksonville Naval Air Station. And we completed that training after 6 weeks. We were assigned to go to a squadron forming out in Seattle, Washington. And that's was basically what they call a composite squadron made up of FM fighters, which are fighter planes as escorts for the bombers, plus torpedo bombers, which could carry one torpedo or several 250-pound bombs or 100-pound bombs, depending on the use that they were to be used on out in the war area. And upon arrival in Seattle, I found out that I was going to be assigned to Composite Squadron 4, which in the interim had moved up to an auxiliary field north of Seattle, approximately 55 miles. And from there is where we really got to know all the squadron personnel, other air crewmen, pilots, the fighter pilots, and became more of an integrated unit and to become a bonded type unit. And at that point we spent probably, I'd say 7 or 8 weeks in that sequence of operations. Low-level flights, higher flights, and then after that was completed, we moved the whole squadron down to a place called Los Alamitos, which is in the desert area not far from Mexico. In that location, the pilots became familiar more with night flying, night landing, and so forth. And the air crewmen didn't have quite as much responsibility to do too much at that particular location. We went along, but we had not too much to do. But we were there, I think, 6 weeks. And then we were moved up to Santa Rosa, California, which is north and east of San Francisco. And there we did aerial gunnery practice, whereby a plane tows a sleeve target, and each plane that flies in the squadron that has bullets in their machine guns have different coded color paintings on their bullets. And as the bullets enter this tow sleeve, the color and amount of hits indicate how accurate the gunner was from the turret gunner. So this is how we were rated on our accuracy. And approximately every 6th or 7th bullet was what they call a tracer. And this had a flight where you could see the color and the brightness of it as it was nearing the target, so you could aim better to lead or lag the target. And that was to develop our accuracy on that. And then after that we went to Alameda Naval Air Station, which is outside of San Francisco also. But that was, again, to give the whole squadron more integrated work. And while there, our pilots went out to qualify at shipboard landing and actual landings on an aircraft carrier. And in our particular instance, it was an escort carrier. So while they were qualifying for that, the air crewmen had 4 days of liberty. And we proceeded to enjoy ourselves. And upon completing their qualification runs, we came back, and then we were sent down to Long Beach as a group. And there was Los Alamitos, which had very good food and so on. Commissary there made a habit of coming up with different types of food where they'd make subs out of loaves, you know, and so on, which was kind of introductory to a lot of food we were not used to in those days. But we were there just a few weeks, and then they transferred our group down to San Diego. We were there just a short time, and we boarded ship, and then we left San Diego about April of '44. And from there, we proceeded to Hawaii. We spent time in Barbers Point, Hawaii, which is an auxiliary field outside of the main island. And we were there only for about a month. And we proceeded to board ship, bring our supplies aboard and our gear. And I guess they also loaded some ammunition and bombs and so forth. And then we headed west to the Marianas Islands with a stop at Eniwetok to get an idea as to where we were actually going to go. And then once we left Eniwetok, then the whole ship was told by a loudspeaker that we were on our way to Saipan invasion in the Marianas, which we helped support. We had 6 of our pilots. My own pilot, Lieutenant J.G. Rocky Carson, was one pilot that volunteered to carry Army and Marine observers. And that meant that when we went ashore, until the Army and the Marines had established a beachhead, those officers would direct fire ahead of the troops advancing in the beachhead area to help them advance into areas that were firing at them. So we would fly low and could feel the shell shake the airplane as they're going underneath, the vibrations from the shells. And we would spot the location where the shells would hit. And they were on topographical maps with different segments and different orients on the map. And we'd report back whether they were long, short, or whatever. But until they established the beachhead, then they bring their own artillery in, and then we would spot for their own artillery on the beachhead that was shooting ahead as they were advancing. And we'd fly low over the panels to determine how far ahead they were moving, hour by hour. And then when they were receiving problems from the caves on Saipan, where they would open these metal doors, roll these little trolleys out with guns and shoot at our troops. Once the doors were open, we'd make runs with rockets, which we had under our wings, into the openings to try to dispense with the Japanese gunfire out of caves. And this is, whether it be ground fire that we were trying to disperse by our own bombs, or whether it was in the caves and things like that, is what our main purpose was: directing fire and supporting the ground troops. Once we had that, Saipan kind of teeter-tottered for a few days with a combination of Army and Marine problems, and that was solved, and they did manage to advance and complete the rest of the island. One of our planes had to land on the island. The first plane to land was a torpedo bomber where the radioman had suffered an arm wound from ground fire that hit the plane. And then a friend of mine by the name of Bob Egan lives up in Plattsburgh, another radioman gunner. He was cocking a camera that he'd taken a picture out the one window. He leaned back to cock the camera, a 20mm shell went right through. He broke his collarbone and got his thumb here. And they flew back aboard ship and they patched him up. And this is more or less, I think it was about 2 weeks at Saipan. And basically, the big thing with Saipan was they had a decent airstrip. I believe they called it Aisley Field, something like that. And they conquered that area without much damage, and they were able to use that once they got the island secure enough around that area to use it instead of from the ships.
I got a question here. A lot of people wonder what it's like to take off from an aircraft carrier. What is the feeling like, and what is it like when you land?
Basically, the biggest thing is from an aircraft carrier the size of an escort carrier, all torpedo bombers are catapulted off because of their weight and what they carry. Fighter planes can make a running takeoff because they're smaller and lighter in weight and carry less armament and fuel. Consequently, a torpedo bomber had to be catapulted off. And they were all landed, of course, by arresting gear. Usually they had 5 or 6 huge cables strung across the flight deck. And when your arresting gear hook is down, and if you land at the proper level of the flight deck coming up to meet you, and you don't bounce, you catch the first or second hook into the wire. But if you bounce over one or two, that means the guy that has the barrier, there's 3 sets of barriers there with wire cable. And he has to be on the ball to see whether or not you're going to catch one if you've bounced over one or two. If he's got pretty sharp instincts as to the ship coming up and being leveling off, and the hook seems like it's going to drag, he'll flip the first barrier down to prevent the prop from hitting and causing an engine change.
It's a quick stop, isn't it?
Yes, very quick.
Quick takeoff.
Yeah. You catapult from 0 to around 80 in a very few seconds. And land, of course, equally as short.
Does it throw your body back or forward or anything?
Well, when you land, it's throwing you that way.
Yeah.
No, forward, I'm sorry. But when you're going off, you're back like this, it's bringing it back into the seat. And we were told to put our hands over our heads and keep our shoulders down somewhat.
So it must have been a thrill that first time.
Yes, very. More so at night when you can't see.
One of the things when they catapult off the ship, the planes don't go straight up. There's sort of like a dip. Like, did you have a feeling you were going to hit the water?
Lots of times you'll see spray from your propellers cursing the water up and spraying the water back toward the ship because of the height that you are, not very high, and you're praying that those engines are going to take over pretty soon and really get going. But by and large, I think we only had one takeoff that didn't make it. We've had several on landings that didn't make it. We had a few fighters that bounced, went over the catwalk into the water and so on.
When that happened, what did they do?
Normally when that happened, one of the destroyer escorts that was associated with our group, we had 4 destroyer escorts and we had 3 destroyers that were our group protection, more or less. They would in turn be radioed to the fact that we had a man overboard in a fighter plane or bomber, and that 1 man or 3 men would be involved. They in turn would shoot to that area and pick them up.
What kind of evacuation training did you have, and how much time did you have to prepare yourself to get out of a plane if it went off the carrier?
Basically, we were all shown what type of escape methods we could have or use, but we didn't always have the conditions that were favorable to use them. Our parachutes normally hung on the wall over the outside-inside door that would let you in or out of the aircraft. And you didn't have room enough to wear your parachute in the rear compartment or up in the turret. They were just too small quarters. You couldn't wear it and function as such because they were chest-type packs. The pilot, in turn, sat on his pack as part of a seat parachute arrangement. And his harness went across over his shoulders and so forth. Now, on August 1st, 1944, we were on an observation flight over Tinian, and we were proceeding almost to the end of our scheduled amount of time there, and our relief, Lieutenant J.G. Owens and his crew, were coming on to relieve us, and Captain James Motley, a Marine captain, was down in the radio compartment, and I was up in the turret, and I'd set the radio up on the frequencies that he wanted. Then I got into the turret and proceeded to use the gun on a couple occasions at a couple of gasoline storage and ammunition storage locations, which I helped to get rid of. And once we got by the first place, I heard a thud, and I thought to myself, golly, it sounded like we hit a bird. Well, then Captain Motley down in the bilge said to Carson, my pilot, he said, Rocky, make a turn to the right. He says, I want to see if the front line panels have been moved on that one sector, and he didn't get any answer. So he said again, and he didn't get any answer again. So then my pilot said on the intercom, I've been hit. I'm going to head for the water. So we were maybe anywhere between 500 and 1,000 feet off the ground at the most. Consequently, we had no chance to use a parachute. And he got the plane into a glide. He couldn't get the flaps down. So we hit the water on the right wing and nose. And that spun the plane around. Well, I knew first thing I had to do, the captain, as far as I knew, was okay. I didn't know he got thrown in the transmitter, but he must have. I pushed that lever forward that retracts 3 individual prongs that go into the arrangement of the turret. That releases those 3 prongs, then you push the plexiglass hatch out, and you climb out onto the wing. So I did that. I started up to try to get the pilot out. I'm reaching down to undo his belt buckle, and the whole thing went out from under me. And that's one thing to this day that bothered me, that I couldn't save him. Now, whether he was dead, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I know he was slumped forward, and
And the other man in the plane was all right?
no.
No. So you were the only one that
I was
survived?
yeah.
Wow.
And then here's what the ironic part of it was. The second pilot I started flying with was coming on station to relieve us. He saw our plane go down. He radioed this information to a destroyer that was offshore of Tinian, and their particular object was to blow coral reefs up so landing ships could go in. They sent over what they call a Gibson boat looking for survivors. Well, they picked me up, and that was it. They tried diving down, but it was too deep, I guess. They couldn't find me. So they gave me a ride over to Saipan, and then I got the thing today that shows priority 4 air transportation from Saipan to pick the ship up at Inducted. And that was one harrowing experience.
Yes. Now, what did you do after this sort of duty? How long were you there in this area?
Well, we were there, I left August 4th to catch the ship at Inducted. I got back aboard the ship there. Then we went down to Espiritu Santo to pick up additional airplanes that replaced ones that were lost and so forth. Then the radioman, Andy Winiger, who had applied for airplane pilot training in the States, was sent back to Pensacola, Florida for flight training. So I started flying with his pilot, who was the one that saw us go into the water, Lieutenant J.G. Owens.
Now, when you had to fly right after that other incident, were you afraid to do it again? Or
I had thoughts, but I also said, well, you gotta kind of roll with the punches. But I was happy to be able to fly with Lieutenant J.G. Owens, Pat, and as I say, I replaced Andy Winiger and his when he went back to the States. After we loaded up at Espiritu Santo with additional planes, and we got a few new crewmen and 1 or 2 more pilots. Then we went to Peleliu, and we were on an invasion of there, which was practically nothing, as far as there wasn't much resistance. And then we rearmed and refueled. Then we went up to the Philippines, and we went through a typhoon just prior to arriving in the Philippines, about between the 10th and 15th of October 1944. We had to go up and tie down the aircraft with additional wire rope in order to keep them from blowing off and so forth. And that was the worst storm I was ever in my life. And the plates on the ship, you could hear them buckle, which you probably have heard too. And that was more scary than some of the other combat was. But by the same token, we got through it. And we were assigned to help back up MacArthur's Leyte invasion. But they also knew that the Japanese fleet was coming, and they made a 3-pronged advance, one through the Surrego Straits and one through another set of straits, to try to get into MacArthur's rear flank and shell MacArthur's rear flank from the sea and the Gulf, at Leyte Gulf. But fortunately, Halsey's fleet took a decoy that the Japanese had sent up north, and he went up to try to make a big name for himself, chasing that big fleet, which was just a decoy. And consequently, between MacArthur and the Japanese coming from the north, a little 6-carrier group with 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts is the only thing that saved MacArthur from getting shelled off the beach. That's why we won the Philippine Presidential Citation. We lost 2 carriers that day, one by shell fire and one by kamikaze, which is the St. Lo.
Is that the ship you were on, the St. Lo?
Well, I was still assigned to the White Plains, but the White Plains was at general quarters. At that particular time, we wanted to land to refuel and rearm. So the St. Lo, one of the other six in our group, was not at GQ. They took us aboard. Lieutenant J.G. Owens, Lieutenant J.G. Hearn were the two from the White Plains that landed. And Owens got a wave off because it was coming in too high, so we had to circle around again and come in. And I might have been the last person physically aboard that ship before it was sunk. I was on it about 18 minutes. I had time enough to go up to the radio shack on the left side of the ship, port side, pick up a new microphone, put it in the turret slot where the microphone went bad. I had the battery switch on. I tested it out in the turret to hear the side tone. I went back up on the wing to throw the battery switch off as when all hell broke loose. That's when a kamikaze hit, came through the back elevator onto the hangar deck. And the bombs went off, and his bomb first, and then the stuff they were loading on and planes to go out next. The captain said, "Stand by to abandon the ship." And I'm standing there on the sponsor seeing which way to go.
Now, how did you feel at that point?
Kind of drug out. I thought to myself, well, I didn't realize I had that shrapnel in my leg even. But it was only a small piece of aluminum, so I pulled it out and tied a handkerchief around it and went out onto the sponson. And the captain said, "Stand by to abandon ship," and there was probably 100 or so already in the water. And I looked around and I said, "Well, golly, there's a DE over there." I said, "That floater, cork floater's all filled up." And that's all I could see. So I helped the one mess cook over to that and see he could hang on. Then I took off for the destroyer escort and then I climbed aboard there.
How did you get off the St. Lo?
I jumped.
Jumped into the...
At probably about 18, 20 feet above the water. I waited till I got down. I was starting back up. And as soon as I hit the surface, I pulled the 2 CO2 bottles. Otherwise, I'd have broke my neck if I hadn't. As you hit the water, that thing would have snapped your neck. You jump down off, you come up, and then you pull your cork thing to inflate your Mae West. Then you start from there.
How long was it in the water, and what was the general scene like with all the men there? Were they in a complete hurry to get off?
Shock?
Basically, they were all looking. They were coming down ropes, and they were trying to get boats off, lifeboats, but there were very few of those. It was mostly just cork floater nets, and a lot of them had just the Cape Hoc life vest on, which was normal procedure and what was issued to a ship's crew. So those that were up forward on the flight deck and so on were coming down ropes that were knotted ropes to then drop into the water. But the ship was practically almost not running at that point, so that they were not being afraid of getting run over or anything like that. But it never entered anyone's mind about sharks or anything like that because you were thinking of too many other things. And as I say, once I got that cork floater net there, I said, "This is too crowded for me." So then I swam over to the destroyer. I believe it's the Dennis. I've gotten it on my record there. And I asked the man, I said, "You got room for another person aboard?" He said, "More eyes we have to look for submarine or for torpedo wakes, the better," he said. He said, "The Japs are around here and the subs are coming all over." And sure enough, they were fired at several times that evening.
And how long were you on the rescue?
The rescue vessel only about overnight until the following afternoon. And then I was put aboard an AKA.
A cargo ship.
Yeah. And then Red Cross issued me a little razor and a toothbrush and so on.
Did
you
you
have-
get a complete set of new equipment when you were reassigned?
No, because my equipment was back on the White Plains. The other one, sister ship to the St. Louis.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever hear how many people survived or
Oh
were
yes,
lost?
they have records as to how many were killed, and they're all engraved on a Taffy 3 memorial tomb out in San Diego. There's a beautiful war memorial there, donated for Taffy 3 and the efforts they had for World War II. And that the amount of people that were lost from each ship is engraved on each ship's stone, along with a bust of Admiral Sprague and one other officer that were involved with that particular Taffy 3.
So then after that, and you were on the cargo ship, then where did you go?
Then
Next assignment.
I have a list of a sheet listed. I believe it's on my thing right there on the wall, in back of the in back of there, the itinerary.
map, yeah.
Yeah, we'll take some
Yeah.
pictures of that at the conclusion of this interview.
On the left-hand side, that tells what, on the bottom, near the bottom, there's a paragraph indicating where I went from the dentist to the merchant ship and so on, until I rejoined, I believe I rejoined the carrier, if I recall rightly, at either Eniwetok or Hawaii, one of the two. And from there, we came back to San Diego, and they arrived there, and we were all given 30-day leaves.
Now, going back to that kamikaze attack, can you describe what it was like? Was it a massive flight of Japanese suicide pilots?
Well, it wasn't what you call a real large group. There was a group large enough that one of the group was shot down by the White Plains, either 40 millimeter or 20 millimeter, as it was making its approach at the White Plains, which was part of our group. But see, they were at general quarters. Now, if the St. Lo had been at general quarters, they may have had a chance to shoot down the one plane that got them. And when the general quarters was sounded, it was too late. Because they couldn't do it. I know on the White Plains, the plane got close enough so they had parts of the Japanese leather jacket and so on, and remnants of the aircraft from him and other parts of him on the ship on the flight deck. But they got it before it got the ship.
Now, did your family know you were there and going through this? And did you get mail or send mail? Or?
Oh, they didn't know I was going through it, no, until after. But they found out later on.
While engaged in operations in the Pacific, did you get any feeling by way of news as how the war was advancing, how the United States and its allies were doing?
Yes, we had news indicating of how the D-Day went on through, how Patton was advancing and so forth. And of course, our particular thing was over with in the Pacific, that part I was involved with, before the Battle of the Bulge, which was a real tough battle, which I wouldn't want to have been a part of either.
Was there any news, did you receive news about the end of the war in Europe, and what was the feeling like aboard ships?
Well, basically, we hadn't received word while I was still on the ship. I didn't receive word of that until after I had received light duty in the United States. They gave me 4 months light duty up in Astoria, Oregon, and as a postal clerk. And then I was shipped down to Shoemaker, California for FFT for the transfer to Hawaii. Once I got to Hawaii, I was given a choice if I wanted to either join another squadron, or they had a bulletin board there listing different openings that were available. So I went to the bulletin board and I saw this notice looking for a radio dispatch yeoman at Comair Pac. So I said, golly, that sounds interesting to me. I think I'll try that. So they took me aboard there, and it made it kind of an interesting thing because you saw a lot of radio dispatches that normally you wouldn't see, and it gives you an idea as to how the war was going.
For the benefit of the people who may be viewing this at some future time, Comair Pac, I believe, stood for Commander Air in the Pacific.
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, was that in one particular location or in several satellite facilities?
That was in Fort Island and Pearl Harbor. Yeah, that was in Fort Island. And it was basically different divisions, material, and that's the one I was assigned to. And there were flag portions of it, field portions of it, and in fact, the orders for the different fleet commanders came out of that directive office. So you had an opportunity to see somewhat what was going on.
While you were on flight operations from the carriers or from land bases in the Pacific, did you have occasions when you were under fire from Japanese aircraft while you're on those engagements?
Yes, in fact, up at Saipan, we were under fire by Japanese aircraft. And we were up that night, and that was our first innovation with a night landing aboard a carrier where you have no lights available, only the side lights that have a little tilted thing. So if you're coming in from the stern, which you normally would be, you'd have those little lights along the side to guide you into the flight deck. And but the idea is that visibility other than that is very poor. But we lost our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Evans, that night, who was a fighter pilot, but he was the squadron commander also. But as far as everyone knows, he had run out of fuel and he had a ditch at sea, but no one had any coordinates to locate him or find him by. Whether he couldn't see his instrument panel well or what, I don't know. But I don't believe he was shot down. They all indicate that he was low on fuel.
Sounds like these pilots have to be quite talented to do some of their
They
work.
sure do.
When you
Especially-
weren't on a mission, did you have any opportunity to watch landing operations on a carrier and see how that was conducted?
Oh yes, we had LSOs, landing signal officers. One was the name of French and the other was the name of Pine. And they in turn would stand on a little sponson at the stern of the ship on the port side, and they'd have a flag in each hand, and they in turn would either raise a flag or lower an arm, depending on whether your right wing was low, they'd want you to bring it up. They would indicate that with the flag. And whether you're going too fast or too high, they would indicate that by the flags. And if you're too high, you've got to wave off and you had to come around again. But they had real good landing signal officers, and here again, the pilots all had a lot of faith in their abilities, and they knew that they had to abide by what they were showing them.
Everyone has to work as a team to help each other.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Either at sea or on land, did you ever have any opportunity to have any entertainment from USO shows?
Yes, we did see some shows. We saw one in Hollandia, New Guinea, and that was a Bob Hope, Ben Blue, Dorothy L'Amour special. Then we also saw one other show aboard a carrier, but that wasn't Bob Hope, that was another group, but I can't recall their names at this particular time. The Bob Hope show, as I say, was on land in New Guinea, and we were there on a short liberty in order to see that while we were rearming and getting new planes and supplies and bombs and so forth.
Did that boost the morale of the troops?
Somewhat,
Or-
yeah. And usually if you landed into a place like that, they would have mail for you, and that in turn would be another boost.
What was life like on board the ship? What kind of quarters did you have? I'm sure it wasn't a luxurious thing like you'd see on an ocean liner today if you took a cruise.
Not exactly. Conditions in our quarters, we had what they call frame bunks, which were pipes about 3 feet wide with canvas stretched between them, and they would fold up when you were not using them. They had a thin mattress, of course, a real thin cotton tick mattress, and here again, you have 3 people on each side, and you got an aisle about maybe 2 foot wide at the most, very most, to get through. You have to kind of work your way into the group to get up. And here again, everyone had their turn at different chores. In some cases, if we were not at sea, we'd have to clean and scrub down the men's heads, as they called it, and for painting and so on, because of keeping it clean.
For the benefit of those who are not familiar with what a head is, that is the military equivalent of the bathroom.
It's in today's paper also, showing an article on it.
What about showers, bathing? Did you have very tight rationing of water and limited time to be able
Yes.
to use it?
The time interval was quite short, and the fact that in most cases on land, that is, you had wooden boards that you walked on with clogs, and on ship there were metal decks, because there was no need for the metal or the wooden floors. And our particular bunk room was just below the flight deck, and they call it like a mezzanine deck, where the CIC room was adjacent to ours. And
That's the Combat Information
Right.
Center.
Yeah, but they always had a coffee pot on there. We had access to that quite often. The food in general was as good as could be expected under conditions of being away from where you could draw fresh supplies. And on occasion you'd put a slice of bread up to see how many bogeys were on the screen, which indicated whether there was ants in the bread or whatever. And of course the eggs were kind of pre-scrambled out of man-made eggs, I guess. But beans and figs were a common Saturday meal.
What about Spam?
Spam was another item that seemed to reach us quite often. And not too much rice, very little rice.
You had regular meals, so you didn't have to rely on rations like the Army personnel or the Marines.
No, we had regular meals. And by and large, considering how long you were out away from port, would be dependent how well the meals were. And one of our cooks lives here in New York State, Ed Wysocki. He was a chief cook aboard ship. And he tried to do as best he could with what he had to do with it. Yeah.
What about religious services on board ship and chances to see movies?
We had opportunity to see movies fairly frequently, except right in the combat zone, and religious services were conducted every Sunday.
Was there big turnouts for religious services?
Yeah. Based on whether or not they'd seen combat, it seemed like how much more religious they became oriented.
I'm leading into that because you said one of the funniest and most inspiring things you had. Tell us about that situation with the chief bosun's mate.
Yeah, our chief bosun's mate aboard ship was one of the cussinest guys you'd want to meet. He would be up and down a person's side, one side and then the other, and never had a good word for anything or anyone. And then the morning of October 25th, I happened to go down the hangar deck to get something, and I saw him down on his knees praying. And that's about 15 minutes after we were under shell fire from the Japanese fleet.
And that was also that eventful day when the ship was sunk.
That's right, yeah. And Fanshawe Bay was, no, not the Fanshawe, the Gambier Bay was sunk about that time span when he was down praying. That was sunk by Japanese shell fire, though. And that man realized there was something else bigger than he in life. That then and there.
You said you had some unusual experience and duties directing men into life rafts in the water?
Yes, basically there was one mess cook who was a black man and one other man. They had been either shell shocked or concussions, and I helped the black man over to the net because he was out of it more so, and then they pulled him up on, but the other lad, I don't know what division he was in or anything, but I brought him over to the thing and he hung on the raft on the side. And then from that point on I said, this would be a good time to make my exit and move over to the USS Nimitz.
Today, the military forces integrate all the men, whether they're black or white. Did you notice segregation with the black crewmen on board the ships?
Definitely. At that time span, definitely.
And could they mingle with you at all, or did they have to strictly stay with themselves?
They stayed pretty much to their own environs, and they were stewards for the officers' mess and so on. And they helped with cooking and like that. But they maintained a certain area for them. They weren't intermingled with the crew as bed partners or anything like that, you know what I mean? Bedmates.
Did they also take part in general quarters duties?
Yes, they did.
And they were expected to do the same kind of experiences that you had to undergo?
They sure did. Yeah.
Now, as a result of your service there, the war was drawing to a close there in the Pacific. You had mentioned you received some news about World War II at the end there. Where were you when it was announced that the war was officially over, and what was the general feeling then?
I was at Pearl Harbor at Comair Pac, and Don Humphreys and Floyd Stuckel and two other of us that were assigned to the Material Division all jumped with joy, and we had a party of our own, and we got some food from the mess hall, and we managed to acquire some other drinks available and proceeded to have a little party. And it was really one happy moment. But it really led us to believe that once the victory in Europe was secured first, from that point on, it more or less seemed to be a matter of time. We all seemed to realize that within a certain amount of time that we'd be celebrating the end of the war. And that's what really crossed our minds a lot.
And then, when did you come home? It was soon after this?
Well, after the war was over, I had what I would classify as a nice particular location, and I did what would like to spend the winter in Hawaii. So I asked for a 90-day extension to my time, and they said sure. So that brought me up until March, from December through March, and then I was transferred back to Lido Beach on Long Island for my discharge. And in essence, what I had mentioned to Bill Marshman at the start of the war about learning a trade by learning radio equipment and theory and so forth led me to my future job with Western Electric as an installer of telephone equipment and radio and microwave equipment. So that in essence it really paid off. My job in the Navy helped my job in the civilian life.
That's good. And then did you become part of any organizations as a result of the
I did join the American Legion down in Ravenna for a short time, but from my observance I didn't see too much recognition of the veterans coming out of the World War II as against World War I and so on. So I maybe stayed in for 5 or 6 months, and I said, I just soon not join if I see what I see I don't particularly care for.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to get out of that.
In among your many awards, these were given to you: the Air Medal, the Air Crewman's Wing, and with that you had 3 battle stars.
Mm-hmm.
Asia Pacific Medal, 2 battle stars, and the high honors there, the Presidential Unit Citation from both the United States and from the U.S., from the Philippine government,
Right.
who were allies of ours during World War II and were possession of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any reunions since the end of the war? Met any of the old crew members?
Well, basically, we met down in Charleston, South Carolina, based on the fact that I saw a little advertisement in the paper from a destroyer escort man by the name of Jack Uson, I believe it was, in Binghamton, New York. I called him up on the phone number that was listed in the article, and he said, yes, they're having a Taffy 3 reunion down in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was probably 15 or 18 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I went down for that meeting, and I met Bob Johnson and 8 or 10 other White Plains people there. Well, during the course of that reunion, Bob Johnson decided, hey, maybe we should have our own ship reunion. And so we got together and said, yeah, that sounds good. So he organized our own carrier and squadron group within Taffy 3. And we met individually for probably the last 14 years. Our next reunion is going to be in Tucson, Arizona, October 21st through the 24th. And then at the end of that, there's supposed to be another reunion of Taffy 3 to honor the Bob Hope Dedication Memorial in San Diego. And that's around the 25th or 26th of October of this year.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
And at the end of this interview, we will put on the end of this tape some video footage of your combat medals and the map showing the Pacific area that you served in, as well as a nice rendering of what it was like when the St. Lo went down, the picture. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
We've got a lot of pictures. This is thing, and we've got pictures that we took out of the dedication of that war memorial, but I didn't look them up today. I don't know where they are, but those are the ones I have with the names of all the men there. Daughter just moved to Seattle, and the other daughter's down in Maryland. That was, yeah. We've got a tape that was on of